the helicopter, by all accounts, got as low as 30 feet.
That's pretty low.
Yeah, it's incredibly low. And then the propellers create this rotor
Wind
wash.
gusts.
Yeah, it's almost like a scene from like a Vietnam War movie where it's just like chaos. I mean, there's these weeds, this brush, this thicket, which might be as high as 6 feet, and it's just swaying like off to the side, back and forth, and debris flying everywhere. People can't hear anything. Like, it's very hard to see.
All right, everybody, welcome to Cases Gone Wild. I'm your host, John Marco. I'm a lawyer in Detroit, Michigan. I've been doing this for about 2 decades. And on this show, we bring you the craziest, wildest, most insane cases that you've ever seen on Cases Gone Wild. And today we have a very special guest who flew all the way in from Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, Jordan Strokovsky, who's here with us today. Great guy, $26 million verdict, medical malpractice verdict that he just got. Jordan, when did you get this verdict?
That was in May of last year, John.
May of last year. Hell of a verdict, hell of a guy. Happy to have him here. So we got to show him some Detroit brotherly love in return. As you know, if you like the show, please follow us, subscribe, give us a like, thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, your grandma, your pets, whoever. Also, remember, we have wonderful videographers. We dress up for you. We try to be presentable here on Cases Gone Wild. Watch us on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, Marco Law YouTube channel, where you can actually see us as we talk about these crazy, fascinating cases. I'd like to get right into it. Jordan, great guy from Temple University, where he got his LLM, and also went to undergrad at Temple, right?
That's right.
Temple's a great law school. It's known for trial advocacy program. I looked at it because I knew I wanted to be a trial lawyer. It's in Philadelphia. Also went to Widner University for law school, right, in Delaware, where you've been practicing in, right, you're downtown Philly, right? You practice in Philadelphia court systems and the Philly metropolitan area, right?
Right, my whole career.
Whole career. Love Philadelphia. If you haven't been there, I encourage people to go. Just do not go for the football games because you guys have some rough fans in Philadelphia. What's going on there?
I think we got a bad rap from, decades ago. But, we do have some very passionate fans, and we very much want the Eagles to win during the games. But
yeah.
I think you'll be treated fairly.
All right.
Don't worry.
Well, you heard it here because I don't want to get like beer thrown at my head or something because the Lions are doing pretty well this year. We might be going all the way. I don't know when this is going to air, but hopefully we're going to go to be Super Bowl champs this year. You guys had your turn. Lions need a chance in the sun, man. But great town. So let's talk about, some of your craziest cases. And when I invited you on this show, I said, Jordan, you got to tell me about some of your craziest cases if you want to be on Cases Gone Wild. And your cases are crazy. Tell me about this dude who got run over by a police bulldozer. That's right. A police bulldozer literally ran over a guy?
Yeah, they did, John. So this was a little bit more than 5 years ago. This was outside Reading. That's in Pennsylvania. That's in the area where T. Swift grew up.
Okay. So tell us about, for our Michigan listeners, we have national listeners, but a lot of people in Michigan, people who are not from Philadelphia. Is this area like rural? Is it like in the city? Like, where is it?
It's a rural area for sure.
Okay.
And this was the first lawsuit I ever filed when I started my firm.
The first one that you ever filed?
Well, yeah, I started my firm in March of 2019, and I filed the lawsuit about a week after.
All right, and you do tell the people about your work generally. Like, this is a civil rights case, kind of, right? Because you sued the police.
Sure. So yeah, this was a civil rights case. My practice is maybe 5% civil rights. I tell people that I handle basically any situation where somebody's catastrophically injured or there's a wrongful death and it's not their fault.
Yeah.
So
similar to my practice.
Exactly. So it runs the gamut. And that's why I have a ton of respect and I'm so happy to be on this show.
Thank you for coming
You're the man. But, medical malpractice, product liability, explosions, fires, car wrecks, bulldozers. Yeah. So, I enjoy complex cases. I like the challenges and I always like helping the little guy take on these big institutions.
Well, you and I share that in common, my man. And, you
Right
know,
on.
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I know it's a world away from Philadelphia.
Still PA.
Yeah, it's still PA. We're not as quite from Pittsburgh. It's a little more blue collar than the Philadelphia crowd, but great places. Love Pennsylvania. It's near and dear to my heart. So I'm happy to have you on the show. So tell us about how in the world did the police drive a bulldozer over a dude?
Yeah, so it's a crazy story. And it was crazy from the second I got that phone call from the decedent's uncle. He was the
So the
administrator
guy
of
died.
the estate. Yeah, the guy died. Not going to show you any photos, but I can tell you it's quite horrific to be run over by a bulldozer. He had his skull and was basically, his scalp was basically flapped open.
Oh my God.
His entire leg was basically filleted from treads and the bulldozer blade, and then basically every bone in his body and organ in his body was broken and ruptured.
So when you're talking about a bulldozer, we're talking about like my little kids play with their toys, but we're talking about a full-blown earth-moving machine, a piece of heavy machinery.
It's
here.
like a military tank. We're talking 9 tons just rolling right
Holy
through.
moly. So why did the police have a bulldozer? And take us through this crazy case. How did you get this case and what happened?
Yeah, so it all just started. I got a call. There's a criminal attorney who got this lead, and actually I was friends with his son, and he reached out to his son saying, hey, this is a complex case. We don't want an attorney in rural area, because it seems like a cover up. We don't want an inside guy. We want somebody from Philly to come on in.
Was it how far is Reading from Philadelphia?
It's about an hour and a half.
And was it the Reading Police Department, or who was?
It was the state police, and then it was the local district attorney and their detectives that were involved with this quote unquote investigation. But basically, so I hear it. He calls me up and he's like, "We can't let this ride, man. Like, they ran over my nephew with a bulldozer, all for some marijuana plants. Like, he has no history. Like, he's a good person."
Was he robbing a bank or something?
No. He just literally had 10 marijuana plants that he was growing on state game lands. And I guess, he didn't, when they found out what was going on, he didn't stand up and let them arrest him. He hid in the brush. And as a result, they ran him over with the bulldozer, basically.
Well, okay, dude. Well, first of all, why did the police have a bulldozer to go and find somebody?
Yeah, so I guess maybe I'll start from the beginning. So this story ends with chaos, or at least that day, on July 9th, 2018. But it started out just a normal Monday, summer morning, beautiful weather. This guy goes out to the farmland. I guess he's familiar with the area. He's been out there a lot.
So he's growing some weed.
He's growing some weed.
Is weed legal in Pennsylvania, by the way? In Michigan, it's legal.
It's basically decriminalized now. It's still technically illegal.
Okay.
But
whatever.
In 2018, not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But we're talking 10 marijuana plants. He's out there with his friend. I guess he's, clipping his plants, so to speak.
Bud tending.
Yeah. And it happens to be on state game lands. I don't know if he knew that or didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
And there's
probably not a good idea, though, to grow your weed plants on the state government. Not that you shouldn't be run over by a bulldozer for it, but, grow them in the wilderness or your backyard or something.
Sure. So they're out there, and who also happens to be out there is a state game lands maintenance worker. He's the one with the bulldozer. He's clearing a path in a nearby farm, okay?
Okay.
So he sees this car parked technically where it shouldn't be parked.
And gets suspicious.
And so he gets this is a wannabe cop. And so he basically approaches, the car, looks inside. I think he sees like a hose or something like that. So he's like, "Oh boy, I got a grow operation." He's hot on the chase. He calls in. So the police, I guess, of state game lands they're from the game commission. They're called wardens or something like that.
Yeah.
So he calls them up.
Is this like in Michigan, we have DNR officers, like Department of Natural Resources?
Yeah, exactly.
Is this like similar type?
Yeah.
It's a law enforcement force, but they're responsible for like the hunting and fishing and stuff? Okay.
Exactly. So he calls them, and the bulldozer guy, his name is Mark. And he's like, "Hey guys, we got a grow operation. Like, you got to get down here. You got to get down here." And they're like, "Hey Mark, we're training today. Like, no, we'll come later. We'll come another day." And he's basically like, "Well, I'm friends with the local police chief. Can I call him? Like, please? Like, all right, Mark, like you can call the police chief. So they call this local police chief.
The small town?
Yeah,
Is it like
small town, like an older, like out of shape guy. And so he moseys on over and, they investigate the car. Oh, maybe there is a grow operation. Then they hear something, I guess, in the brush or whatever. So then the maintenance worker, again, pretending to be a cop, he actually runs in there because the police chief, he even testified in a criminal hearing, like, hey, I'm old and out of shape. Like, I'm not trying to go in the woods. So the maintenance worker runs in there, chief, like, you got to come. We found, like, get down on the ground, get down, go. So he says he storms in there like a bull in a china shop.
Like guns a-blazing.
Yeah, guns a-blazing. They get Greg. So Greg is the decedent here. They get Greg's friend, who's there. So
Greg's there with his buddy.
Yeah, he's there with his buddy. So they get his buddy. They cuff him. They bring him down. And they ask, who are you? David Light. They run, no record. Who's there with you?
Where's Greg, your client?
Greg. So they say Greg ran, where I don't know if he ran or walked quickly, but he basically ended up somewhere about 50 feet away.
So he was trying to get out of there.
Yeah. So they know, though, who he is. They know where he lives. They look him up. He has no criminal history, aside from maybe like something of possession like 20 years ago.
So this isn't some like drug kingpin or anything like that. This isn't some drug smugglers running. It's just dudes growing some weed.
Yeah, he's unarmed. So they very easily could just be like, all right, let's get the weed if we want to, and we'll find him at his house. Like, he has no car.
Yeah.
Like, he's not a threat to anybody. Like, he's a hippie guy. Like, he's a Grateful Dead guy. Like, his main joy in life is going to Grateful Dead concerts and concerts like that and taping them and things like.
So were they just growing this for personal use, or?
That was my understanding.
Yeah.
And he was an outdoorsy guy. He had a garden at home. He really just enjoyed outdoor living.
Yeah.
But in any event, they couldn't just let it lie. They couldn't just leave. So what do? They call the local police, and then they call the state police. So the next thing you know, you got another local township police. They're showing up. You have more game wardens coming. And then you basically have the entire vice unit of the local state police.
So how many cops are on the scene?
We're talking about 15 total.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're basically like, they initially think to bring a dog, and for whatever reason they couldn't. I don't know if a dog was unavailable or if there's like, hey, we don't want the dogs going through the thicket.
Yeah.
But in any event, they're just basically waiting around for like 2 hours, wasting a lot of resources. Nothing's going on. This whole time, Greg presumably is just, he's just hiding out. Yeah. Or the decedent. Yeah. But he's basically just laying on the ground, probably just hoping they'll leave. I'm sure he's scared.
Yeah.
But no, they don't
Sounds
leave.
like, like when I was in college and the cops would come and we were like 20 drinking beers, we would like run and hide in the woods
Exactly.
and wait till the cops leave, so then we can slink out
Exactly.
and go back home, right?
Exactly. But that unfortunately is not what happened. Instead, they called in a helicopter.
No way.
Yeah, so they call in this helicopter, and it's not a helicopter, and I don't know what experience you folks have with helicopters. I didn't have much before all this. But, it's not a helicopter 500 feet in the air or 1,000 feet in the air. The helicopter, by all accounts, got as low as 30 feet.
That's pretty low.
Yeah, it's incredibly low. And then the propellers.
That's like you can get out of it.
Yeah, it's like, and then the propellers create this rotor
Wind
wash.
gust.
Yeah, it's almost like a scene from like a Vietnam War movie where it's just like chaos. I mean, there's these weeds, this brush, this thicket, which might be as high as 6 feet, and it's just swaying like off to the side, back and forth, and debris flying everywhere. People can't hear anything. Like, it's very hard to see.
Yeah.
But in any event, because the weeds are all like blowing off to the side, the helicopter pilot does spot Greg. And before I filed the lawsuit, I was going off limited evidence I could find. But I remember in the autopsy report, which made me really be extra suspicious that the police screwed up, was the helicopter pilot's account was he's screaming through a loudspeaker, "I see you lying there, get up." So it's not like a story of John Rambo, running, away from 15 armed guards in the woods for hours at a time. He's literally like laying in the ground about 50 feet from where he was first seen. Okay. But anyway, the 15 law enforcement, they set up a perimeter, But then it's like, okay, we spotted the guy. Like, let's go after him. And they complain like, oh, this brush is so thick, it's impossible to walk through. That's what the district attorney and investigator said. That's why they had to use a bulldozer. But the reality is...
And when you're talking about brush, what are we talking about? Like weeds? Or tell the viewers, and we'll show them a picture too.
Just with pictures. Like, it's something where you can navigate it in shorts, and you might get a couple thorns in your side, or you might get a couple scrapes. So what are we talking,
like high grass?
High grass, basically. Okay. Like, maybe as high as 6 feet at certain points. But also, this is the woods where, deer are going through it. So there are like deer trails and things like that. So you can slowly walk around it and find, these little trails to walk through.
So your client is laying in the...
So he's laying in there. The helicopter spots him, is hovering over him. He radios in to everyone, okay, I got him. The loudspeaker, I see you laying there. So everybody knows, okay, head towards the helicopter. That's where he is.
So the helicopter's just hovering over this guy.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Like, here he is. I'm hovering over him.
Yeah. And then they're basically like 3 or 4 teams of troopers and police. They're splitting up, but they're all slowly making their way to him. And the helicopter pilot, one of his first interviews, is saying, hey, I spotted him. I see everybody descending on him. Like, they're getting there. Like, yeah, it's taking some time because they're going slow, but like, they're getting there. And I'm keep saying, like, you're still there, or stay there, to reassure them that they're going to get there.
Yeah.
And then he goes, and then all of a sudden I see a bulldozer. And it's like, well, what's your first thought? And this is in the audio. And he goes, my first thought is, holy shit, is that really a bulldozer? And that's really when I was investigating.
Who was driving the bulldozer?
The maintenance worker.
No.
Yeah. The
gung ho guy.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So he was still hanging out, I guess, this whole time, like hot on the chase. I can see where
this is going.
Yeah.
The guy was wanting to be, show those other cops that he could be just as good.
Yeah. And then basically, so everybody's going to get there on foot to this unarmed guy. And for whatever reason, the corporal of the vice unit goes to the maintenance guy and goes, sees the bulldozer and goes, does that thing work? And the bulldozer guy, Mark Weiss, goes, absolutely. And it's like, all right, well, let's get on. And they both admitted, like, well, we couldn't see, we couldn't hear. We knew the guy was lying there, but whatever. I guess it's a smart idea to just, let's start driving a bulldozer where we can't see or hear exactly where this guy is laying on the ground. And it's going straight, and you'll see the path. It's a straight path. And then out of nowhere, it just cuts to the left for like 10 feet. And then that's where they say they stopped. They go, where is this guy? Where is this guy? Where is this guy? Then they get off the bulldozer, and he's dead and crushed to death underneath the bulldozer.
No way. So they literally just drove a bulldozer over this guy?
Yeah. And
crushed him.
And, they're freaking out. Then the wannabe cop, he's devastated. He's in shock. He's apparently going around saying, oh my God, I killed this guy. And then of course his buddies, the wardens, go, hey, Mark, why don't you calm down? Like, let's get you out of here. Like, don't say anything.
Oh,
'cause he's like, I just killed this guy. And they're like, we ran him over, things like that. And so he's freaking out, basically admitting to it. Everybody's like, he was run over. But then coincidentally, these 2 wardens who didn't see anything, they basically saw that their colleague, the maintenance worker, killed a guy. And they start thinking, no way he was run over. That's impossible. It's impossible that this guy got run over by a bulldozer. He must have crawled underneath the back of it to hide or something like that and crushed himself
while it was moving.
So that was the theory. Yeah, well, there was.
So, oh my God. So these guys run over. So here's the defense. So this seems like a straightforward case. Guys lying down, they run him over with a bulldozer. But then they came up with the defense of, no, the guy crawled underneath a moving bulldozer, and that's how he got hurt.
Yeah, and those were the actual findings by the local district attorney's office.
Who's going to believe that?
Everybody believed it until I filed the lawsuit to actually get the evidence. That's what's crazy, or most people believe it.
Did they ever charge any of the people?
No. And frankly, there's no investigation into the investigators of this, because it was crazy how they investigated it. They just cherry-picked certain facts, no real science or evidence to back up what they were saying.
Well, they were probably scared of look, we could be charged with like manslaughter or worse, you know, of
Sure.
a guy. We ran over a dude with a bulldozer
Sure.
when they didn't need to. So you get this case, and like, what are you thinking? Like, what you filed a lawsuit? Is it in federal court or is it?
Yeah,
in
it's in
court?
federal court, and I'm thinking like,
Did you bring it like excessive force claims or?
So I brought excessive force claims, although technically, you know, there's a good argument that they didn't try using excessive force because it was an accident. So the main theory for the federal component was state-created danger.
Okay, yeah.
Was that they basically created an incredibly dangerous situation when they didn't have to, and they're responsible
That's
for
a good
killing
state-created danger
And there was
case.
actually, I filed under a state tort claim as well for just negligently operating a vehicle.
So how does that work? Oh, a motor vehicle exception. Because you guys have governmental immunity in
unfortunately.
Pennsylvania.
And
what
we have
that
caps.
means,
We have caps too.
oh, no. So what that means for people that don't know, and we talked about this on the show, is if you get run over by like, you know, me, let's say I'm driving to work and I run you over, you can sue me and like anybody else. But if I'm working for the government, and I do it, let's say I'm a police officer or a DNR officer, a game warden or whatever, then there's immunity generally, and you cannot sue the government because, well, that's a whole nother show, but it's just, it used to be you couldn't sue the king back in the day. The king was immune. The king could lop your head off with his head, and you can't sue the king no matter how stupid it is because the king is from God. That was the beginning of governmental immunity. Nowadays, it's not as bad, but it's still, there's lots of protections across the country and in Michigan where it's very, very hard to sue the government. And you have to know what you're doing, and there's very special exceptions. But one of those exceptions is if usually in Michigan at least, and it sounds like in Pennsylvania, if the government is driving a vehicle, like if they run you over with their car, then you can sue them, right? Is that the same in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just got to thinking, well, this is basically a car, right?
Yeah, it's a motor vehicle.
It's moving forward, right? So I knew it was BS. Like the first thing, so I hear the news reports, and the local DA gave this hour-long press conference. Nobody asked any questions. He just basically said, hey, this guy was growing weed. He was breaking the law. The police told him to come out, and he resisted, and the police did nothing wrong here. There was no excessive force. There was no use of force at all. Everything was Greg's fault. Why? Because they found some weed in his system and apparently some methadone because he was in recovery. And maybe they found some meth in his system, but no idea like if he was actually high at the time.
It sounds like the guy shouldn't have ran from the cops. He shouldn't have hit in the thicket. We can all probably agree on that, but you don't deserve to get run over by a bulldozer.
Right, absolutely.
But they always try to blame they try to take things that aren't really the critical issue and blame the victim. That's just part of the thing. I had a case out in Colorado, sorry to diverge real quick, but where this dude was a mechanic for a ski lift. Okay? You know, these ski lifts are huge machines that require like gears and chains and engines and all this stuff. Well, somebody has to fix that stuff, Jordan, because it breaks down, it needs maintenance. So there's actually ski lift mechanics. So this guy's working on a ski lift and it needed some maintenance. And this ski lift had been sucking mechanics in and killing them. Okay. It had killed like 8 mechanics across the world.
Wow.
And because it didn't have guards on it. And what it would happen is you'd get something stuck and it would pull your body in to the gears and grind you up. So this dude got sucked in to the ski lift and it ground his body up in the ski lift. And their defense was the guy was high. He had smoked. This guy was, it's Colorado, man.
Yeah.
Everybody at the ski place is high. So the guy had like smoked a joint or a bowl or something. And they said, oh, because of that, it's his fault that he got sucked into the ski lift. But they'll blame anything, they'll blame anything or try to take advantage of any victim. We won the case. I mean, we ended up getting settled, but that sounds like something you have to deal with in these cases. Obviously. No. So they try to blame him. And so what happens when you file the case?
So I file the case. Then I finally get my hands on all of their internal interviews and their investigation. And I basically saw, like, I hate to use the word cover up, but it was a cover up. It was a cover up. And again, I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist or something like that, but they cherry picked evidence. There was basically no evidence because they didn't look into anything.
Well, dude, I just want people out there, cover ups do happen. Yeah. And they happen a lot.
Sadly.
They happen a lot. It would be like, imagine if I was charged with a crime and then they had me investigate myself. I mean,
that's what happened here.
Is that going to be fair? Is that going to be fair? I'm sorry, but like, if I'm charged with, and I'm my life's on the line, the investigation's going to be biased, you know?
That's what's crazy about this case is, so the bulldozer operator, he was considered a person of interest by the detectives, and they said that. And they interview him the next day. And I told you at the beginning, he's basically saying, I killed this guy. Then his buddies go, hey, no, that's impossible. He must have crawled from behind. So then the next day he comes in all calm and cool saying, no, there's no way I ran him over. What must have happened was, oh yeah, I actually stopped the bulldozer right before I came to my final stop. He must have been hiding and just like nobody must have seen him, even though there's a helicopter and 15 people around and someone following the trail. Nobody saw him, but he actually came out from nowhere or out of nowhere and crawled underneath the back of the bulldozer, which, by the way, like we're talking like 16 inches of space. And this was an older guy and he was not walking well.
Plus, why would you crawl under a moving
because
bulldozer?
he's high out of his mind, apparently. So I guess that makes sense, right? Because if you have weed in your system, you must crawl behind bulldozers. And he must have thought that the bulldozer would never run again. And unfortunately for him, it turned immediately once he got under there and ripped him apart. So it was ridiculous. But the bulldozer itself, I mean, wouldn't you think they'd want to actually examine the bulldozer? Like, hey, if this guy did crawl from behind, which is kind of a crazy theory, maybe we can find some prints of his, as he's climbing behind, or
accident
or
reconstruction.
DNA. Right. Did you do that? Did you look for prints in the back? No. Well, how about the front of the blade? Did you look for any of that? Like, no. We didn't look for anything. Like, well, what happened to the bulldozer? Like, what was the chain of custody? Oh, well, actually, the maintenance worker took it back to his shop and it stayed outside. It wasn't even under like a protected covering. Like, what? And then like 2 weeks later, when the police actually took it to, their warehouse, they already noted like, yeah, it's been raining. Like,
washed off all the blood.
It's all washed off.
Yeah.
But they allowed him to assist with the investigation. They're like, Mark, well, take us out. Show us how everything went down and everything like that. So he's like, all right, I'll take you out and operate. I'll get you back there. It was crazy. And then there were no radio transmissions somehow related to what the helicopter pilot is saying to the rest of the team, which is crazy because we had dozens and dozens of radio transmissions produced. And they're basically saying, oh, well, actually, our communications was on a line that was not recorded or something like that. And the helicopters also had, video cameras, which could, videotape what's going on. That apparently wasn't on. Some of the officers had body cameras, which apparently weren't turned on. When he was dead.
A lot of fishy stuff going on.
When he was dead underneath the bulldozer, somebody stated like, hey, should we take some pictures of him, underneath? They're like, no. Just pull him out. It was just crazy.
Well, when crazy things happen, I've seen this time and time again. Stuff starts going missing. I talked about on the last episode my case with the city of Detroit this summer where a wheel came off one of their vehicles because they forgot to bolt it on. God knows how. It was the day before 4th of July. And suddenly all the maintenance records that showed who worked on the vehicle went missing because they did a system upgrade within 24 hours and apparently purged all the records. But this happens time and time again. Believe me, it does happen. In fact, in that case, somebody went into a filing cabinet, a locked filing cabinet, found all the records and destroyed them.
Wow.
So, you don't believe it can happen. It happens. And I think the problem is when you don't have an independent, unbiased investigation, when you have the people who are being accused of wrongdoing controlling all of the evidence, that is a problem. That's why on these things, you have to have people that investigate that are not going to be personally responsible or liable. You don't have criminals judge themselves. You don't have people accused of crimes act as their own judge and jury. That's crazy. But so why do we let this happen in this type of context? You know, I had a case, same type of thing that I've talked about before, where the police raided the wrong house and shot a little girl, 3-year-old girl in the head named Ayanna Jones in Detroit. And the video went missing that they were using to film this whole raid. Where did it go? And they also come up with these crazy excuses of that's like mind-boggling. Like, you tell people about it and they're like, no, that didn't happen. In that case, they said an 80-year-old grandma must have hit a submachine gun.
Oh my God.
Causing it to go off. I mean, give me a break. And in the city of Detroit case, it was, oh, this wheel just popped off. We didn't do anything wrong. The bolts were on it. All 5 bolts just suddenly popped off. I mean, that doesn't happen.
How unlucky. Yeah.
That doesn't happen. It's like, give me a break. You tell people, but it is. And unfortunately, some of these crazy things involve the government, where you're like, these people are, I see it happen, and it's kind of scary.
Yeah.
But so what ended up happening? So you filed this case, and so what happened?
So I ended up taking 25 depositions. So I deposed every single person who was on the scene that day. I deposed all of the detectives and basically confirmed that their investigation was complete BS. I deposed the district attorney, and you know what? I'm not going to make fun of him today. I'm going to keep the high ground, but I got to tell you, some of his reasoning is just, it's nonsensical, and almost like, if we meet up again, we could watch his press conference, how he explains what happened, and you could turn it into a drinking game. It's so ridiculous. And I deposed his top, assistant DA who was involved with this, and basically got him to admit, like, well, if this fact happened, would that cause you to look into this in a criminal matter? Like, all the stuff that actually I proved happened and we have evidence of. He's like, oh yeah, I would absolutely look into this. Oh yeah, I would definitely consider charging someone if this was the case.
Did you have to go to trial on the case, or did it settle?
No, so it actually settled. It's one of those situations where you think about the trial itself, like, wow, talk about a trial.
Talk about a case gone wild.
Yeah, and I'd be bringing in 25, witnesses all on cross, and I'm sure you can talk about this. It's kind of fun. Cross-examining law enforcement. They're not good liars.
Yeah, it can be. It can be fun. And it is interesting, depending on the case,
Yeah.
My philosophy is there's 99% good police officers and law enforcement.
Absolutely.
Okay, there's 99% are good, and it's the bad apples that spoil the barrel, right?
Right.
So I always say that whenever I have a police case, I make sure I tell the jury, look, I represent cops. I have friends, really good friends that are police officers. I teach my children to respect police officers. And most are good people trying to do their job. But there are, like anybody, like there's bad lawyers, there's bad doctors, there's bad priests, there's bad anything. We're human beings. And there's bad apples that need to be held accountable and need to be exposed. And there is in law enforcement, just like anything else. And, that's why we have this system to hold them accountable. And vice versa. And I have auto cases where somebody gets hit. One of my first witnesses is usually the police officer because they're disinterested, right? The problem is conflicts of interest. When you have a law enforcement officer or anybody else, or let's say it's a doctor, same thing with a doctor accused of malpractice, you don't have the doctor investigate himself because people, when they're in trouble, we know they're not going to be the most motivated to find out that they did something wrong. So you settled the case before trial, and it sounds like a crazy case.
Yeah, and if anything, maybe to loop in the helicopter pilot. I'm just kind of telling. So he's the guy I told you initially, where I heard his interview with the police, and he seemed like he felt really guilty. Like, I don't know what they were doing. This was crazy. They basically ran this guy over. That was my gist of it, and he felt bad about it. And I'm like, okay, this might be the one guy that I depose who's gonna come clean.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be nice to this guy. Unfortunately, the second I depose him, completely changed. It goes back into the standard MO that I'm used to of just deny everything, never accept responsibility. And so I got in. So what was crazy with his testimony was he says, I had a visual on the guy. He was right beneath me lying down. He wasn't moving. And he goes, basically said, I'm looking at him the entire time. And then the bulldozer comes down. I still see him. Then the bulldozer stops and I no longer see him. Why? Because the bulldozer just ran him over.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And he wouldn't admit that. Well,
see, people got to realize, how long did this happen? Years after when you finally deposed the guy?
About 2 years after,
2 years after. So what happened in those 2 years? Well, he probably got a lawyer, right?
Right.
Who sat with him, a defense lawyer who's telling him what to do, you could be held responsible. And you got tremendous pressure as well. This guy has to go back and work with his fellow officers. And so anytime we have a case, it's like when I have an employment case, for example, and let's say I have an employment case and I'm suing someone for sexual harassment or racism or doing something bad, right? A lot of the witnesses are people who still work at the employer, right? And they do not, it's real hard to have people say bad things against their employer because they are still have to go back and see those people day in and day out. It shades their testimony and people are less cooperative. And it sounds, there's no difference here. It sounds like, right?
The crazy thing that the helicopter pilot said, this kind of shows you how absurd, you can take this. And it might be the most absurd line of questioning I've ever had was, he keeps saying like, well, I don't know if he got run over. I just wish he stayed where he was. And I go, what do you mean stayed where he was? Because he kept saying, well, he was actually 10 feet away from where the bulldozer was. I don't know how he got underneath it. I'm like, what are you talking about? You were watching all this unfold. That's true.
He saw him the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. So,
and I asked him, I go, so are you telling me that Mr. Longenecker can teleport? And he goes, I don't know what he's capable of.
Oh,
I'm like,
God.
Whoa. Are you telling me that he's here, the bulldozer stops, and then somehow he's able to teleport 20 feet underneath the bulldozer and then crush himself underneath the bulldozer that already stopped? And he goes, I don't know what he's capable of.
This is called frivolous defenses. I always talk to juries and I say, we all hear about frivolous lawsuits, the McDonald's coffee or whatever. Everybody talks about frivolous lawsuits, frivolous lawsuits. People don't talk about frivolous defenses. But, I'll tell you, you march down to the courthouse, there's courtrooms full of people claiming they didn't do anything wrong. And there's a lot of frivolous defenses. And I think that when defendants take absurd positions, instead of just being honest, and instead of being accountable and being forthcoming, when they take these absurd positions, it really pisses people off. And it pisses juries off if you catch defendants doing these frivolous defenses. This sounds like a frivolous defense. The guy teleported. Give me a break. They would have been better off coming in and saying, look, our officers were responding to a rapid situation. They probably shouldn't have taken a bulldozer in there. We didn't need to do it. We're sorry. Let's try to figure out a way to do it. We would have done things differently looking back now, but we were overeager at the time. Whatever it is, just take some honest accountability. Same thing with that Detroit case that we're talking about. Say, look, it was the day before the 4th of July. Our people were not as careful as they should have been. This should have never happened. This wheel shouldn't have went down the road. We're sorry, but we did that. We're doing the best we can, or whatever. But take some accountability instead of making up these crazy frivolous defenses, which I think can really backfire. There was a big employment case here in Detroit against Founders Brewing. Do you know Founders Brewing? Do you drink beer? I don't know if you're a beer drinker. All right, Founders. I used to go to Founders when it was a little hole in the wall in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I was going to Aquinas College. And we used to go there on Sundays and drink their beer. It's a great beer. I love Founders beer, but the company was in hot water here in Detroit because they had expanded from Grand Rapids to Detroit with some racism allegations, okay? And they were accused of being insensitive to African Americans. and that there was one of the former employees brought a racism lawsuit against Founders. Okay. And during the deposition of this Founders Brewing guy, one of the questions came up about race. Okay. The guy was black who was bringing the lawsuit, and it was a race discrimination, obviously. And the defendant said, well, I don't know what race he is. And the attorney's like, wait, what? What do you mean? He's black. And he goes, what do you mean? You look at him. What do you mean you don't know what race he is? And the guy said, well, I don't know if he's black or not. And the guy's black. I mean, you look at the guy, he's black. I mean, come on. Like, you may not know, is he Jamaican? Is he, Nigerian? Is he African-American? Like, but the guy's black. I mean, come on. I'm a white guy. I mean, you look at me, I'm Slovakian. You might not know that, but I mean, I'm a white guy. And the guy said under oath, well, I don't want to speculate on his race, and I don't know if he's black. Sir, I haven't done a genealogy study on his family. It's absurd. It's absurd. And they got hammered on that case, when if the guy would have been like, sir, I know he's African-American, he appears black, but we didn't do anything wrong. Just be honest. Be upfront when you take these absurd positions on both sides of the V, as a plaintiff or as a defendant. I think it hurts you. But, we digress. So let's move on. So that's crazy. That sounds like a crazy case. Tell me about your verdict. $26 million. That's a huge verdict. Huge. I don't care where you are. That's a great achievement. And you got this verdict when?
The verdict came down in May of last year.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
We got time to talk about this case. Tell us briefly what is the case, and tell us the craziest parts.
Sure. Well, the craziest part might be a little bit about what you were just saying about not really keeping it real, whether it's on the plaintiff side or the defense side. I felt like my case, I kept it real. Like, I was truthful in everything that was discussed, where the defense was just going for the kill and just being outlandish and ridiculous and basically trying to get this poor guy who was an amputee to walk away with, pennies on the dollar. But essentially,
so the guy's a medical
it's a medical malpractice case. It's one of the first medical malpractice cases I got once I started my firm. So this is, again, almost 5 years ago. And I got to tell you, I was super excited to have, I knew this was a good case. I just had this feeling. And the response, with this case was pretty crazy too, in that signed the client up, somehow was able to get his medical records within 2 weeks, was able to get it reviewed by all the experts I need to review it within another week or two. The guy was at a house party.
Philadelphia,
in Philadelphia. Yeah. He was at basically like a New Year's party or a holiday type party. He got involved in a scuffle, nothing too crazy, but he got kicked in the leg. And as he left the party, his leg just gave out. Like, he couldn't walk, and he was in incredible pain. So the ambulance comes, takes him to the hospital, and he's a big guy, and they're basically just writing him off. They're like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you.
Like downtown type hospital?
Yeah, in North Philly.
Okay.
They're basically acting like he's a pill seeker. They're not properly looking at him, and they just want to send him home, frankly, right away. Like, okay, you have no break.
So the guy goes in with major knee problems, and they just want to rush him out.
So he dislocated his knee, and it popped back into place. This pill seeking
thing's a big thing. There's studies on this. Your healthcare result can be determined on your socioeconomic background. It's undoubtable. Like, if I go to the hospital, in a more wealthy area where, I go in a suit or whatever, I might be treated differently than a poor minority who goes to the hospital. There's studies on this. I used this in my last case where I had a African-American poor client who was treated much differently than the doctor admitted on the stand. I said, sir, would you treat your brother-in-law the way that you treated my client? And he looked at me and said, probably not. I mean, and that's just the unfortunate reality. It's a sad reality. So this guy sounds like he got treated like that.
Yeah,
Is he an African American?
Yeah, he was. And then long story short is they had countless opportunities to figure out that, oh my God, this guy's leg's dying. We got to get him into surgery.
Well, what was wrong with
fix
his
it.
leg, really?
So he had a popliteal artery rupture. So right behind your knee is the popliteal artery. It's the main artery that is responsible for blood circulating to the rest of your leg.
And your leg has big arteries in it, doesn't it? My understanding is, you can bleed out if you cut an artery on your leg because it's so big.
Right. And so basically, when his knee was dislocated, it snapped the artery. And so
the artery was bleeding inside of his leg?
Yeah. And
so the artery's like spilling blood out
Yeah.
inside of his leg and you can't see it.
And that's what caused the one thing they did find, which was something called compartment syndrome, where basically your calf gets so tense and it's almost like a balloon filling up. And if you don't do something to relieve the pressure, the balloon's going to burst and your leg's
So
going to
you have
die.
like internal bleeding and there's nowhere for it to go, right?
Right, basically.
So basically the blood's just pushing and pressure inside your leg. And this is like when you have, you hear these cases, if you get a brain injury, like my guy who got hit by the tire that I keep going back to and fractured his skull, they will remove your skull if your brain's bleeding because there's nowhere for that pressure to go, and it literally crushes your brain because all the pressure builds up inside there. Something like that sounds like, right?
Yeah. And the crazy thing too is usually when you get compartment syndrome, it happens maybe if you fall from a great height or you're in a very serious car accident. You get some really serious acute trauma to the leg. So here they knew he has no fractures. What else could it be? And the only other real scenario is the situation of where you have a ruptured artery where blood's spilling in there.
And it doesn't get better on its own?
Right.
Like what's the...
Nobody... So they do a surgery called a fasciotomy, but that's to treat the compartment syndrome. Nobody ever really thinks, what was the cause of the compartment syndrome? It's basically like they go in, do the fasciotomy. There are some cited concerns where they really should have said, oh, we think this guy dislocated his knee. This is really serious because he probably has a ruptured artery. He's going to lose his leg if we don't repair it. Instead, it was like, oh, he might have had a dislocated knee. Let's check that out later on. I'm going home for the day.
So they miss it. It keeps pumping.
Yeah, and his
blood.
leg dies, essentially.
His leg died?
Yeah, basically. And then
you couldn't bring it back.
They couldn't bring it back. And he's there in the hospital for several weeks before the amputation.
So they had to take his leg off.
They did a bunch of debridement procedures. And finally, after several weeks, it's either your life or your leg. And they did the amputation. And this whole time, they're telling him, sorry, this just happens. It's not like they said, oh, we screwed up. We're so sorry.
This shit happens.
They just said, hey, you just had a bad complication. We did everything we could, blah, blah, blah. But internally, they're like, oh, hey, we gotta contact risk management.
Problem.
We got a problem. Certain doctors are texting each other like, hey, are you going to put them on notice for this? And, fast forward, almost 5 years later when we get to trial, this whole time they're denying fault, at every turn. And
these medical malpractice cases are hard. Did you have a lot of money in on the case?
Yeah, they definitely cost a lot of money to litigate. And this whole time, they're denying everything. But, especially as I'm preparing for trial, that's when you really find out how good your case is, right?
That's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, you either get into it and you go, oh, maybe my case isn't as good as I thought. Or in this case,
it's better
like,
than I thought.
Oh, my God. I don't think, and this whole time I'm like, wow, I think liability or fault is really, really strong here. I just felt like it was almost a checkmate situation based off all the physicians and the nurses, their own testimony. Whether all of them are at fault, we'll see what a jury would say, but definitely one of them is definitely at fault. And maybe for that reason, and I also think a jury might have been upset if we tried this liability case because they were clearly at fault. And so then on the eve of trial, I get a call basically saying, all right, well, we're going to admit fault for the one doctor at least. I'm like, what? And that's something I've never had that happen to me in a medical malpractice case. It's pretty rare.
Yeah, they normally do not admit that they did something wrong.
Right.
It's very rare. I mean, I just did a case where the doctor mixed up breast implants. So a lady had, mismatched breasts from having kids and all this stuff. And the doctor put the big implant in on the already bigger breast. So she came out with like one gigantic, enormous breast. He was supposed to even them out. They wouldn't even admit fault in that case. It's like, give me a break. You admit you put on the wrong implants, but they did the shit happens defense. Well, when you get in there, it's hard to see what breast is bigger, and it's crazy. So, okay, so what happened?
So they admit fault, which changed the whole dynamic of the case, because my whole focus for months at a time was, establishing liability, explaining it, because that was going to be a certain challenge, because it's not like they made one mistake. I can just focus on, one 5-minute sequence. This was the mistake. They made a ton of mistakes. It's like, okay, I got to figure out a way that for the jury to understand how all these mistakes were made. So they admit liability, and for a minute, the winds were kind of taken out of my sail. It's like, oh, well, the case is completely different now. Now it's a damages case, so I had to reorder how I was doing everything. But, when I put my case on, that went pretty well. Everybody testified well, and we just kept it real, right? This guy, he was an amputee. He was a young guy. His life was ruined. He was about 27 when all of this happened.
Oh, man.
He was working at the time, but he had ambitions to be a chef. His girlfriend just found out she was pregnant, so he was going to be a dad. All this stuff to look forward to. And then the next thing you know, he's at home and can't even get out of bed, or needs help going to the bathroom while his girlfriend's pregnant. He can't even go to appointments, with his girlfriend and be there for her, or be a dad.
That's the scary thing about what we do, is seeing how like one tiny little crazy thing changes somebody's whole life. Like this guy's at a party for New Year's, and the next thing you know, he's having his leg chopped off.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just crazy. Like, nobody expects these things to happen, but they do. And the one thing I don't think things can get crazier, and then every day they do. Like, you see these scenarios and that's why we have the justice system, and that's why you have to have this system that we have. It's the best thing that we've come up with, because you can't take back and put back people together. Like, this guy's going to be ruined for the rest of his life and have to struggle and have pain with that.
It was horrible. And then, so even though the hospital admitted fault, still at trial, it was basically their attempt to nickel and dime my client at every single turn, to basically say, okay, we admit fault, but he's doing great. He's thriving in life, and he'll be able to do whatever he wants to. And so their main focus was just on the economic damages. So on their defense, they had a physiatrist who was saying that my client could do whatever he wanted to. So, basically the same as if you weren't an amputee. And it was really ridiculous. And by the way, he wasn't really that big of a specialist with amputees. He kind of moonlights helping amputees. He worked at a spine clinic where they advertise all we do is the spine. And so in voir dire, I go, so you work at, the spine care clinic, right? He's like, yeah. And all you do is spine. No, I don't do that. But the spine clinic advertises all you do is the spine, right?
Spine.
Yeah, but I don't do that.
But
like, so your clinic lies.
That's how they always get
yeah.
it. So you ended up getting a big verdict, right?
Right.
And my understanding is that the defense attorney apologized to the jury or something.
So in openings, that was their defense, or part of their defense was, hey, we made a mistake. Our condolences to, the plaintiff and his family for everything he's had to go through, but we made a mistake. We're owning up to it, and just be fair with assessing damages. So they did take
some accountability. I mean,
right.
that you got to give them a hand that.
Well,
but was it a false apology?
I wasn't. Look, I told the jury it doesn't really matter if it's a sincere apology or not. That's not why we were at trial. But to me, at least, it was a BS apology, because for 5 years, basically, they're denying fault. They're threatening to. They're basically saying, you better take this lowball settlement, or else we're going to drag this case out for years.
And they're making you hire all these experts to show that they're at fault, right?
Right.
That's the thing. So I deal with this a lot. And when they do admit fault and take accountability, it's like the day before trial.
Right.
It's like, it's not from the beginning. It's like the day before trial. And people don't understand, unless you've been through a trial. It is one of the most, for the person, it is one of the most stressful, anxiety-provoking, scary, and it prevents people from healing, okay? You are seriously hurt to have someone call you a liar or to say that you're not hurt from having your leg taken away from you for 5 years, and then the day before a trial to say, oh, just kidding.
Exactly. And this whole time, my client's wondering, they're denying this whole time.
Denying they did anything wrong.
Yeah, and this is finally my opportunity to be like, all right, well, let me see you deny it in court or see what our experts are going to show proving that they're wrong. And then it's just like, nope, we admit fault. We're not going to talk about it at all. But what rubbed me the wrong way, and again, I told the jury it's not why we're here, but nonetheless, when he apologized for the first time ever, the first time hospital.
So for the first time, your client is hearing in a courtroom in front of a jury that they're sorry. I mean,
right.
Come on.
And it's not the doctor. It's through his attorney. But what rubbed me the wrong way and probably rubbed my client the wrong way, the attorney didn't even look at my client when he made this first ever apology. He was playing it to the jury. He was staring at the jury saying, yeah, we're sorry, basically. And I said that in my closing. Like, did you notice that? Did you notice that when they apologize, that they didn't even have the dignity to look my client in the eye and apologize? And that's where I actually turned around and I looked at the doctor and the defense attorney and I go, your apology is not accepted.
Yeah.
That was not cool.
If they would have done it from day one and said, we're sorry, we made a mistake, let's make up for it, or let's try to, resolve this, I think it would be probably a different result. It would have been a different story. And they got hit for $26 million, right?
It was just ridiculous. I mean, their experts had zero credibility because they said the most ridiculous things. Like right when I started the cross of him, I go, so in your report says you say my client can do whatever he wants in life, right? Like working wise. Oh, yeah, he can. Oh, okay. So he can be a fireman? Yeah. So you're telling me he can kick down a door, run into a burning building and save children? Yeah, he can do that.
Give me a break.
Like, oh, can he be a cop and chase people down the street with a gun?
Can he drive bulldozers?
Yeah, he said yes. He said yes to everything.
Give me a break. So, all right. So that's a great result, man. Congratulations. And
Thank you.
Congratulations to your client. It never makes up for it.
Right.
But, it's the only justice that we can get. So, all right. So next time I go to Philly, what's the best cheesesteak?
Oh, boy.
I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Put me on the spot. I always used to like Jim's, but Jim's burned down. I got to double check.
Down?
I think it might be back up again. But there's always Pat's and Geno's. I mean, that's for everybody. Have you ever been to Pat's and Geno's?
I have been to Pat's and Geno's. I've been to them all, man. I love Philly cheesesteak.
And Barclay Prime has a very fancy cheesesteak if you want to go that route. I've never tried it, but
I like the down and dirty.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have to check it out. I'll hit you up next time in Philadelphia. And what's that show? It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
And it is. It's always sunny.
It's always sunny, baby. Well, thanks for here. It was really nice to have you on the show, Jordan. I wish you continued success. I know you're killing it out there in Philly. And keep up the good work. Keep fighting for justice and keep doing your thing.
Thank you. I'm just trying to follow your lead. So it's an honor to be here. I appreciate it.
It was great to have you. All right, it's been another awesome episode of Cases Gone Wild. Thank you for joining us today. As always, if you or a loved one need legal help, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. MarcoLaw.com. That's MARKO law.com. Or give us a call, 313-777-7LAW. Whoever you are, wherever you are, contact us. We'll make sure we get you the help that you need. Until next time, it's been my pleasure as your host, John Marco, on another Cases Gone Wild.